the unseen pipeline from border to blight. We've journeyed through the visible wounds of America's internal decay, the abandoned factories of the Rust Belt, the fentanyl-ravaged streets of Kensington, the tent cities of Skid Row. These are symptoms of systemic failures within our borders. But what if the deepest wound, the source of much of this chaos, originates far beyond our city limits? What if the crisis bleeding into Kensington is being actively fueled by a problem at our very national doorstep? A crisis unfolding along thousands of miles of our seemingly invisible southern border. This is the uncomfortable truth, rarely spoken, often suppressed, and profoundly consequential. The dangerous, accelerating nexus between illegal immigration and the lethal fentanyl epidemic consuming our urban centers. The unseen hand, cartels and human trafficking. The statistics are stark. In the last 3 years alone, unprecedented numbers of individuals have crossed the southern border illegally. While many seek asylum and a better life, a darker, more predatory element exploits this chaotic flow. Transnational criminal organizations, the infamous drug cartels, are not merely observers. They are active architects of this crisis, leveraging the breakdown of border security. They exploit desperate migrants, turning them into unwilling human collateral, or worse, into forced mules for their most profitable commodity, fentanyl. This is not a problem isolated to border towns. It's a direct, unchecked pipeline to the streets of America's most vulnerable cities, transforming places like Kensington into literal terminals for chemical chaos and human exploitation. The dangerous synergy. Kensington's new demographic. How do open borders become superhighways for death? How do vulnerable migrants seeking solace and safety become unwitting pawns in the most lethal drug trade America has ever seen? We will expose the dangerous synergy, a broken, overwhelmed immigration system providing both the human collateral and the critical logistical infrastructure for the fentanyl cartels. This isn't just a humanitarian failure at the border, it's a national security lapse bleeding directly into our communities. Kensington, already reeling from decades of neglect, is now experiencing a demographic shift, with new arrivals, many undocumented, becoming both victims and, tragically, sometimes facilitators in the ever-expanding fentanyl ecosystem. This is the uncomfortable truth about how national policy failures manifest as devastating local realities, making Kensington a chilling symptom of a much larger global crisis. The Cartel Playbook, exploiting vulnerability. The fentanyl that floods Kensington originates primarily from China, smuggled into Mexico, where it's pressed into counterfeit pills or mixed with other drugs by the Sinaloa and Jalisco new generation cartels. Their playbook is cunning and brutal. Utilize the existing infrastructure of human smuggling. The same routes, the same coyotes, the same bribe networks that bring desperate migrants across the border are repurposed to transport fentanyl. Migrants, often trafficked by the cartels themselves, arrive in the U.S. indebted or under duress. Their lack of legal status, fear of deportation, and desperate need for work make them prime targets for coercion. They become the invisible, disposable links in the drug distribution chain, pressured into transporting fentanyl from border states to internal hubs like Philadelphia. This exploitation is a direct consequence of a porous border and a humanitarian crisis converging with a criminal enterprise. The inversion of law enforcement's mission, the immense strain on customs and border protection, and local law enforcement along the southern border, inundated by unprecedented numbers of migrant crossings, has inadvertently created a strategic advantage for the cartels. Resources that should be dedicated to interdicting drug shipments are now diverted to humanitarian processing and managing mass arrivals. This inversion of priorities allows a greater volume of illicit substances, particularly fentanyl, to slip through undetected. Furthermore, the practice of catch and release for many undocumented migrants means that individuals with potential cartel ties or those vulnerable to coercion are sometimes released into the interior of the U.S. without adequate vetting or tracking, effectively becoming invisible conduits for drug distribution networks that ultimately terminate in places like Kensington. Kensington's new demographic vulnerability exploited. The influx of undocumented migrants into urban centers like Philadelphia, particularly into already struggling neighborhoods, creates a new layer of societal stress and vulnerability. Kensington, with its existing infrastructure for addiction and poverty services, however overwhelmed, becomes a reluctant magnet. New arrivals, often arriving with limited English proficiency, no local support network, and a profound fear of authorities, are uniquely susceptible to exploitation by local drug gangs. They are offered meager wages for high-risk activities, acting as lookouts, delivering drugs, or even selling fentanyl directly on the streets. Their desperation for survival, coupled with the systemic barriers to legal employment, makes them tragically perfect candidates for cartel recruitment, deepening the crisis within Kensington itself and diversifying the pool of victims. The strain on social services and public perception. The convergence of the fentanyl epidemic and a burgeoning undocumented population places an unprecedented strain on Philadelphia's already overwhelmed social services, shelters, food banks, and public health initiatives. These resources, designed to support established low-income communities, are stretched beyond their capacity, inadvertently creating resentment among long-term residents who perceive that their limited resources are being further diluted. This creates a dangerous feedback loop where socioeconomic frustration can unfortunately morph into anti-immigrant sentiment, further fracturing the community fabric. The challenge for policymakers is immense. Address the humanitarian needs of all residents while simultaneously stemming the flow of illicit drugs and human exploitation without inadvertently exacerbating community divisions. Beyond local solutions. A national intervention, the invisible border crisis in Kensington, demonstrates that local solutions, however well-intentioned, are ultimately insufficient against a problem fueled by porous national borders and transnational criminal networks. Addressing this requires a radical, multi-pronged national intervention. First, a comprehensive overhaul of border security is imperative, not merely to deter crossings, but to dismantle the cartel infrastructure that profits from both human and drug trafficking. This means investing in intelligence, technology, and personnel to interdict fentanyl at its source and disrupt the human smuggling routes being repurposed for drug distribution. Second, for those migrants already within our borders, a clear, humane, and efficient pathway to legal status and employment is crucial to sever their vulnerability to cartel exploitation. Without legal avenues for survival, they remain trapped in a shadow economy, serving as unwitting pawns in the drug war. The ethical imperative. Reclaiming national sovereignty and human dignity. The choice before America is stark. Continue to deny the interdependencies of these crises, allowing fentanyl to devastate communities like Kensington while human lives are commodified at our borders, or confront the uncomfortable truth with decisive, compassionate action. Reclaiming effective control of our national borders is not merely about security. It is an ethical imperative to protect vulnerable migrants from exploitation and to stem the tide of lethal drugs destroying our cities. This requires political courage to address both the border crisis and the urban drug epidemic as inextricably linked facets of a single, profound national challenge. The time for convenient silences is over. Share this documentary to expose the dangerous synergy between illegal immigration and America's fentanyl crisis. Subscribe to America's Uncomfortable Truth as we continue to investigate the systemic failures that define our nation's most pressing challenges.